Hello, fellow Gambians and non-Gambians who might be watching this video. First of all, let me say that this video is intentionally produced for individuals and organizations who might be interested in a global climate change research that I and a team of researchers will be conducting in the Gambia by the end of this month. And I think this image really depicts the idea of global climate change. And in this context, we are looking at it in the context of natural capital. And we know that climate change is a global phenomenon, is a global problem. We know that all countries are responsible. We know that some countries will be most vulnerable than other countries. But we also know when it comes to adaptation that we all need to work together as a team. Adaptation can be more local, but we need the international community's support and collaboration in order to build a better community for the most vulnerable countries and communities around the world. So let's get started. Let's go straight to what we are here to talk about. Essentially, as I said, we will be trying to estimate a total economic value for ecosystem services along the Gambia's coastline. We'll use contingent valuation method, which really asks people's willingness to pay for coastal protection in the scenario in which we'll look at, and we will also look at a different scenario in which we'll ask people about their willingness to pay for improved waste management along the coast. For those of you who might not know me, I am Mfamarake Damfa, currently a Ph.D. student really interested in climate change adaptation, economics, and policy here at the University of Minnesota, United States. So the presentation has really two major components. The first component is just to look at it from a theoretical point of view and put it in a global context and really try to identify some of the steps that will be used in conducting a contingent valuation study. And the second section will really look at what exactly are we investigating, who cares, who should be involved, who benefits, and who can support the project. So when we talk about the idea of ecosystem services in environmental economics, we are really talking about goods and services provided by Mother Nature for the benefit of human well-being, for the benefit of poverty reduction, for economic development, for environmental sustainability. And when often you hear the word ecosystem services, sometimes you will hear similar concepts like environmental and natural resources. You will hear nature's contribution to people. You will hear natural capital. These are similar contexts as far as this research, or similar concepts used as far as this research is concerned. So there was an assessment called the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. The report really indicated four major components of ecosystem services. So they are being categorized. So one is provisioning service. We know that Mother Nature provides services that we directly benefit from. There is also what is called supporting services, habitats that are helpful for the functionality of ecosystems as a whole. We know that Mother Nature also regulates itself in terms of water quality, air quality, in terms of natural hazard regulation. So Mother Nature can do all of that. And my favorite is really the recreational or cultural services provided by Mother Nature. Recreation, if you go to Senegambia on a Sunday, you see a lot of people on Senegambia beach enjoying the area and the landscape and the beauty of the ocean. So that is really a value that we benefit from nature. So when we talk about this idea of total economic value in environmental economics, we're really talking about use values and non-use values. We know that this natural capital or natural resources provide direct benefits to people, and this direct benefit can either be consumptive. There are things that we directly consume, for example, fish and water. There are also non-consumptive uses from these natural resources. For example, the value of recreation is non-consumptive. We also have what is considered to be option value, the fact that we may in the future be able to use these resources if we want to do so. The non-use values really are three major ones. One, we have the existence value. That is the mere fact that we know these resources are available and they are existing for ecosystem functioning. We altruistic value, even though we may not use it, but if other people can benefit from the resource, that is definitely a value that most people or some people cherish. And we know bequest value, the knowledge or the value of us passing on these resources to the future generation is indeed essential as far as ecosystem services are concerned. So when we put these framework into a global context, we know that the framework is becoming increasingly relevant for the consideration of the value of ecosystem services into the system of environmental economic accounting. Really, this environmental accounting system is aimed to reflect the value of assets or services, goods that are omitted from, of course, what we know, the system of national accounts. So when you look at countries, how countries value or estimate their GDP, gross domestic product, there are some component of the environment that are not included in the GDP estimation. So there is a new accounting system that environmental economists and environmental economists and traditional economists are looking at in order to really capture the value of ecosystem services in our national account, into our national accounts. So the aim here is really, from a policy point of view, is to promote an ecosystem-based approach to ensuring sustainable development goal. We know that globally we have the Global Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and we know a lot of countries, including the Gambia, are currently busy trying to implement the Global Sustainable Development Goals. And scientists here at the Institute on the Environment Natural Capital Project, scientists that I really have the pleasure to work with sometimes, are really interested in this phenomenon of the integration or the interaction between ecosystem services and global sustainable development goals. And basically, they develop a model which really look at integrating ecosystem services to global sustainable goals. And they identify 6 SDGs that have direct link with this ecosystem service. Of course, we know the SDGs, SDG 2, 3, SDG 6, 11, 13, and 15 are all SDGs that have direct linkages to the global sustainable development goals. So from a theoretical point of view, again, when we look at known market valuation methods, really there are 2 major components when we are looking at known market valuation. When we say known market, these are goods and services that we do not have them in the market, and we cannot transact in these goods and services in marketplaces. For example, you cannot go to a market and buy recreation directly. So, but there are ways in which economists try to measure the value that people derive from these services, and those valuations are essential, fundamental in our policy development and for project implementation purposes. So, usually there are stated preference methods or revealed preference method. The basic difference here is that stated is sort of a hypothetical market situation that is a scenario-based model. We create a scenario and try to estimate or understand how people will behave in that scenario. Okay, and the 2 major methods used in stated preference is really, one is contingent valuation, which we will be using in our study, and the other one is discrete choice experiment or choice model, others will call it. A little more detailed and technical, but CV traditionally or in the literature has been widely used than discrete choice experiment. Just to know that there are other methodologies that are being used in direct revealed preference. Like I said, we use travel cost hedonic pricing, just to mention that there are other options that we can. These are really based on actual behaviors observed, in terms of how people interact with nature. So when we say contingent valuation, a lot of people are like, what are you talking about? Really, the simple definition that Carson gave was that contingent valuation is a survey-based method, okay, frequently used for placing monetary value on environmental goods and services not bought or sold in the marketplace. And a recent article by Johnson and others really mentioned that the goal of any CV or contingent valuation study is to improve or maximize the validity and the reliability of the resulting estimates. So that is really important that we understand. I will talk more about validity and reliability. So when we look at it from a little historical point of view, we know CV has been conducted, has been applied since 1960s by a famous economist called Robert Davis. And since then, CV has been widely applied in social, environmental, and natural resource disciplines, usually by economists and natural resource and health economists are also found to be using CV a lot. We know that over 2,000 studies have applied CV, and it may not be surprising that most of these studies were conducted in the developed world. However, that is not to say developing countries are not getting interested in CV. In fact, CV studies have been applied in 80 developing countries. Again, most of them are in Latin America and in Asia. That is not to say, again, African countries are also using CV in their studies. In the Gambia, unfortunately, only one study applied contingent valuation back in the 1993 in CRR with farmers. Some guy, Houghton, did the study with farmers in CRR since 1993. So two major approaches that we use when we talk about contingent valuation is that willingness to pay for an improvement or a protection or a restoration project versus willingness to accept compensation for a damage that is being caused on the natural or environmental resource that people benefit from. So in our case, we are looking at willingness to pay. So we are looking at a gain, we're looking at an improvement, we're looking at a protection scenario. Somebody may be skeptical about the reliability of CV. It's just to know, Johnson and others, the recent paper on CV really mentioned that the reliability of CV results to inform policy and litigation decision making, especially in the developed world, is no more debatable. It is unquestionable if the right approaches are taken. So just quickly on the design, we know first we need to know what are we evaluating. So we'll talk about it a little more later. We need to know, or we need to have a representative sample, and we need to know who are we targeting, our target population. I'll talk a little more about payment method and payment vehicle because they're a little more technical. So when we say payment method, because we are asking people to express their maximum willingness to pay, in what form are they going to make this payment? They can make the payment either through cash, or they can make the payment by providing labor hours. But in the CV literature, when we talk about payment vehicle, we are really talking about it can be a cash again, and some again there is interest in people using labor as a substitute or as an alternative approach to cash. But the payment vehicle, usually most studies use tax, or which becomes more compulsory upon people, knowing that it might be a requirement or a regulation that people have to pay the tax. Others argue that there are a lot of disadvantages with using tax as a payment vehicle. Some say, why not we use donation, voluntary payment that really expresses or allow people to make an offer based on their abilities and capabilities, not based on the fact that they'll be required by some kind of law to say that they have to or must pay this amount. So, but again, there is an interest in the idea of labor being used instead of cash. I will talk more about it a little more soon. So when we are using these methodology, it is important that we know how do we put the question. There are different formats in which CV questions are being proposed to people, and we call them elicitation procedures. There are really four major ones identified in the literature, but our study will focus on the referendum format or the dichotomous choice format, which really will be providing values, bidding values to people, and randomly will be selecting one value and asking an individual whether they are willing to pay that value for an improvement project. They will either say yes or no. And then we have subsequent or follow-up questions to ask why they are not making an offer or why they are saying no. Other approaches, like I said, is really open-ended. It can be, what is your maximum amount of payment, or what is the maximum willingness that you are able to pay? And we have close-ended bidding questions also. In that case, a little similar to the dichotomous, but a little more different. And then we have the payment card. So these are really the four major payment or payment questions that we ask. So like I said, so when we look at CV studies, it is important that we know our objective is to improve the validity. What is validity? Validity in CV really means to minimize bias. And we know a lot of surveys suffer from biases, but we are trying to minimize bias in CV studies as much as we can. And that is really where the interest is now. And how do we minimize bias? We need to properly design the survey. So there is what is called survey bias. From the design stage of the survey. Remember, garbage in, garbage out. So you need to design a good survey, and you need to make sure you implement that survey in the proper manner. So we have to minimize, be aware of survey biases involved. We have to be aware that out there in the field, there are people who will be giving us misleading answers, and that is really called strategic bias, just trying to avoid, answering the question, or they give you answers that are really unrealistic. That is hypothetical bias, because this is a hypothetical market scenario that you are given to people. Sometimes it is difficult or hard for people to conceptualize or visualize a hypothetical situation. So the scenario has to be really clear and straightforward so that people understand exactly what are they valuing or what are they paying for. Like I said, the payment vehicle bias, whether you're using tax versus whether you're asking people to make a voluntary offer, can also create some biases. So there are pros and cons to each of those. Of course, there are individuals out there who will protest. There are people who are unwilling to make any offer. These could be because they don't trust our institutions, or because they don't have money, or they just basically prefer the status quo. They are okay with the scenario or the situation in which we live in today. So in terms of some of the techniques that we will use, the survey is under design, is really I've received a lot of inputs from professors and faculty members here at the university. And when we come to Gambia, we will also look at, we'll make a stakeholder consultation for people to review the survey and make sure that the scenario that we are presenting is not only that is applicable, but it makes sense to people. We will definitely have a training. The interviewers will be trained. About 40 university students, really SOSA students will be involved in this. And it could also be non-SOSA students. If any university student is interested, they can contact me. So we will have training. Interviewers will be trained about the survey, and there will be pre-test after the training. So we'll go out, make sure we're asking the questions in the right framework, in the right context, and we are translating the questions in the right manner. So the pre-test will really help us to do that. And during the implementation, we will also use graphic design or photographs that will depict the visibility levels being valued. Really, the pictures that show the scenario to people so that they can really think about this hypothetical situation in a more realistic manner. So in any research, there are ethics involved, and we should be aware of those ethics. As researchers, we need to approach people with respect. We need to ensure that we get their consent before we collect information from these people. We need to make sure that our subjects or our respondents are not at risk in any way by answering these questions. And we need to be fair and avoid discrimination of any member within our target population. And of course, there is no room, absolutely no room for deception. We cannot provide misleading answers or misleading questions or information to people. We cannot afford to do that, because that can create some other unintended consequences. As far as confidentiality is concerned, we'll ensure that individual data is kept properly, and that in terms of reporting, no specific individual data will be reported. It will be aggregated. So when we are doing the implementation, we will definitely try to do some supervision, try to make sure there is somebody watching, just paying attention to what the interviewers are doing and the interaction between the respondents and the interviewers. And of course, the interviewers are encouraged to edit and cross-check their information upon completing the survey. It's a good practice to go through each of the questions, make sure that you don't list anything that is an error, recording error or something like that. And upon that, we will enter the data, so there will be some component of proper data entry to ensure that what is being collected is entered into the computer in the right way. Of course, having collected the information, we'll use regression analysis to estimate the average maximum willingness to pay, willingness to work for the different scenarios that we're looking at based on some explanatory variables, or what we call independent variables that explain the variation in our model. So we will also do some form of validity and sensitivity test to determine the robustness of the study result. And finally, as I said, we will aggregate individual data to estimate values for the entire population of interest. So that is the end of section 1. For section 2, let's get into so-called. Who won the last workout? Well, we already know. So section 2, exactly what are we valuing? So I have 3 major CV scenarios. The first scenario is really focused on Banjul. We are asking Gambians and non-Gambians their average or their maximum willingness to pay for improved coastal protection against global climate change in Banjul. The second scenario is a similar question, but in that scenario, we are looking at the coastal cell 6, which is the Senegambia area, asking people again their maximum willingness to pay for an adaptation measure or mechanism for protecting Senegambia beach against climate change. So those 2 scenarios, we really using cash, only cash as our payment vehicle. Remember payment vehicle? We're using cash as our payment vehicle. So when we look at the third scenario, which is really looking at willingness to pay for improved waste management for recreational, cultural, and non-use values along the open ozone beaches of the Gambia. And here our study sites are Banjul again, Bakau, Tanji, and Sanyang. In this case, we're looking at really our community fish landing sites. Okay, we know that waste is an issue around this area. And in this scenario, we're using both cash and kind. Kind here, we're talking about labor as our payment vehicle. So as I said, there is a lot of interest in using labor as a substitute to kind. And I joined scholars and researchers who really believe that contingent valuation studies conducted in developing countries really underestimating the value that our people have for environmental restoration or protection or conservation. The reason is because most of those studies are using cash as a payment vehicle. We know poverty condition in these countries. We know liquidity constraint, income constraint of our people. So if you ask a poor man whether they are willing to make a cash offer for environmental protection or improvement, they might really give a low estimate or a low value simply because they don't have money. But when we look at other options like providing labor hours, really our people might indicate, and studies have really mentioned that in those contexts, some people, there are debate around this. Some studies found no difference. There was a study in Cambodia that really cast an labor hour. There is really no difference, but there is another study that applied the context in a more general format and concluded that people are really willing to make higher offers when you ask them about labor than when you ask them about cash payments. So the fourth research question that we have is really Banjul sustainability. Will Banjul be a sustainable and a vibrant city in the next 40 years' time? So we know from research or from statistics that Banjul's population is drastically reducing. It's the only part of the country in which people are migrating for many, many reasons. So we want to investigate as a research project. We want to investigate what are some of those factors responsible for people's relocation from Banjul. Our census data indicated that Banjul's population has declined by almost 25% since 1993. About 375 households do not exist in Banjul that were existing in 1993 census. And we also want to focus people's migration pattern in Banjul. In other words, we want to investigate or understand current residents' willingness to relocate from Banjul due to climate-induced sea level rise, current or future climate scenarios that we know already. Who are the stakeholders? Who cares about this? Well, of course, we should all care as a country. Gambians and non-Gambians, we should all care. But in any stakeholder list, we usually have the key stakeholders, institutions that are really mandated to build a resilient Gambia or a better Gambia as far as this project is concerned, are definitely the National Environment Agency, the Area Council, Department of Fisheries, Department of Water Resources, the Gambia Tourism Board, Department of Parks and Wildlife, Gambia Bureau of Statistics, and going to the international organizations, including UN agencies, NGOs. We know also community fishery centers, local communities, hotels, and of course the beach users. They are all part of the list of stakeholders that we have. So who benefits from this project? Really, who benefits is really first knowing that we can collect data that is going to be accessible to the general public. So we're going to improve data management and data usage for informing public policy. We also know that this research will involve about 40 UTG students, interviewers, who really could be inspired and interested in conducting CV studies in each of these scenarios. CV can be used to, for example, estimate the value of improving air quality conditions around the Bakau dumping site. We all know that is really a headache for the country and for communities living around that dumping site. So CV can also be used for reducing flood risk in Ibo Town. That's another area that CV can be applied. It can also be used for protecting, of course, the monkey park, right, or wetlands or cultural heritage sites in the country. CV can also be used for improving what public education and healthcare needs. It can also be used for providing environmental services such as garbage pickups in market areas. CV can be applied in all these contexts. How can you be involved? Please, you can fund. This research is not funded by any organization or institution or funder yet. So you can fund this research. It is at the moment going to be funded by a post-student like me. You can also volunteer to participate in terms of becoming a supervisor. And of course, we will welcome individuals from organizations like the NEA, from the NDMA, and from GBOS to help us in supervising the students. And we also would like to have people who can just volunteer to edit the questionnaires. Also, you can come in and join the university students to be a researcher. Being a researcher is really important, or an interviewer, because in that you will know how the questions were designed, and you will be able to practically ask these questions. And definitely it is a rewarding experience, in my opinion, for anyone to be involved in this process. And you can also come and help or volunteer in terms of data entry, helping me to input this ton of data into the computer. What do we need? We need some logistics. Of course, like I said, since it's not funded, we will need your support in terms of providing breakfast and lunch. We also need some cash support in terms of providing transportation refund to the students who will be involved in this study. And we will need vehicles also. So if you can, not donate, but really if you can help us use your vehicle, that would be nice. After the survey, we can return the vehicle. And we will need support in terms of providing T-shirts. T-shirts are good in terms of how the interviewers will be visible in the community and how community members will react to people in a uniform T-shirt. So the expected returns of your support. First, the print media and the electronic media will be used to acknowledge your hearty contributions. Your name or the name of your organization could also be printed on the T-shirt if you support this project. And of course, the final thesis that will be written upon conducting this research will also acknowledge your contribution. And finally, just want to say that if you are interested in really understanding the scenarios in a more detailed form, watch the subsequent videos that I will do. Hopefully I do them. I think I will, on each of the 4 different questions that we are interested in investigating. So on that note, thank you very much. Like I said, this research is important for the country. This research is important for a better Gambia that we want to build. It's important for policy development and for program evaluation. Going to be those days when we just design public policy without being informed by any research or data. So I think this will really improve public policy and development and implementation in the Gambia. So on that note, I thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing from you You can directly contact me or contact any of the research team members if you are interested in supporting this research in one way or the other. If you're interested in being a direct participant of the research, directly contact me. On a final note, I just want to take this opportunity to thank the leadership of SOSER, the president and his executive, for really collaborating with me and registering students already. We have about 30 people who have registered to be part of this research. So I'm very, very delighted and honored, and I'm very grateful to the social team and to the entire university fraternity. So once again, it's your brother, your fellow Gambian, Famarake Damfa. Thank you.